sometimes the most powerful messages are delivered without words. In a world where we rush past each other, caught up in our daily routines and responsibilities, we often miss the small gestures that carry the deepest meaning. But what happens when someone trained to notice every detail, every potential threat, every movement in a crowd, suddenly sees something that stops them in their tracks? This is a story about connection across barriers of protocol, duty, and circumstance. It's about how a single moment of human recognition can transform not just one day, but an entire perspective on what truly matters. In the rigid world of royal ceremonies, where every step is choreographed and every second planned, sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones that were never supposed to happen at all. What you're about to discover is how one little girl's simple gesture had the power to halt an entire royal parade, reminding everyone present that beneath uniforms, titles, and formal procedures, we are all just human beings seeking connection and understanding. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Westminster, as thousands of people gathered along the parade route. It was the Queen's birthday parade, an annual tradition that brought together citizens from every corner of the kingdom. Families had arrived hours before dawn to secure the best viewing spots, children clutching small Union Jack flags, while parents balanced folding chairs and packed lunches. Among the crowd, 7-year-old Emma Mitchell pressed close to the metal barriers, her small hands gripping the cold steel as she stood on her tiptoes to see over the adults in front of her. Her grandmother, Margaret, stood behind her, one weathered hand resting protectively on Emma's shoulder. They had travelled from a small village in Yorkshire, making this Emma's first visit to London and her first royal parade. Emma wore her best dress, a navy blue frock with white trim that her grandmother had sewn especially for this occasion. Her dark hair was neatly braided, adorned with a small red ribbon. In her free hand, she clutched a handmade sign that read, "Thank you," in careful, childish lettering decorated with colourful drawings of hearts and flowers. "Tell me again about the guards, Nan," Emma whispered, her eyes wide with anticipation. Margaret smiled, her own eyes twinkling with the memory of her late husband, who had served in the household division decades earlier. "Well, my dear, these are very special soldiers. They protect the Queen and the royal family. They stand so straight and tall, and they never move, no matter what happens around them. It takes great discipline and honor to be chosen for such an important job." Emma nodded seriously, absorbing every word. She had been fascinated by stories of the royal guards since she was old enough to understand them. To her young mind, they represented everything brave and noble in the world. 3 blocks away, Staff Sergeant James Wellington was making his final preparations for the parade. At 28 years old, he had served in the household division for 8 years, participating in dozens of ceremonial events. His red tunic was pressed to perfection, every button gleaming. His bearskin hat positioned at the exact regulation angle. His rifle was inspected and ready, and his black boots reflected the morning light like mirrors. James took his responsibilities seriously. Born in a working-class neighbourhood in Manchester, he had joined the army at 18, seeking purpose and direction. The military had given him both, along with a deep sense of pride in serving his country. Being selected for the household division was one of the highest honours a soldier could achieve, and James never took that privilege for granted. As he stood in formation with his fellow guardsmen, James ran through his mental checklist one final time. His job was to maintain perfect posture and bearing while scanning the crowd for any potential threats or disruptions. Years of training had taught him to notice everything while appearing to notice nothing, to remain alert while projecting an image of serene confidence. The parade began precisely at 11 o'clock. The sound of military bands filled the air as the procession moved slowly through the streets. Horses pranced in perfect formation, their riders resplendent in ceremonial uniforms. The crowd cheered and waved as various regiments passed by, each representing centuries of British military tradition. James marched in rhythm with his unit, his eyes methodically scanning the faces in the crowd. He saw businessmen in suits checking their phones, tourists snapping photographs, elderly veterans standing at attention in respect. Children waved flags enthusiastically while their parents held them up for better views. Everything appeared normal, exactly as it should be. As they approached the section where Emma and her grandmother waited, the crowd's cheering grew louder. James could see the sea of faces, all turned toward the parade with expressions of excitement and patriotic pride. The morning had been routine so far, another successful ceremonial event unfolding according to plan. Emma bounced on her toes as the guard unit approached. She could see them now, tall and imposing in their red uniforms, moving with mechanical precision. Her heart raced with excitement as she watched these real-life heroes, the protectors of the realm her grandmother had told her so much about. "Look, Nan! They're coming," Emma whispered urgently, raising her handmade sign higher. Margaret squeezed her granddaughter's shoulder gently. "Remember what we talked about, dear. They can't stop or wave back, but they see you. They see everyone who comes to show their support." Emma nodded, understanding that this was about respect and appreciation, not expecting anything in return. She had made her sign because she wanted the guards to know that people like her and her grandmother were grateful for what they did, even if they couldn't say so directly. As James's unit drew closer to Emma's position, something caught his peripheral vision. Among the waving flags and raised phones, he noticed a small figure holding up a sign. His training kept him marching in perfect step, but his mind began to process what he was seeing. The sign was clearly handmade, created with care and attention by young hands. But it wasn't the typical "God Save the Queen" or patriotic slogan he was accustomed to seeing. This sign simply said "Thank you" in a child's careful handwriting, surrounded by hearts and flowers drawn in bright crayon colors. James felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't expected. In all his years of ceremonial duty, he had seen thousands of signs and banners, but there was something different about this one: the simplicity of the message, the obvious care that had gone into making it, and the earnest face of the little girl holding it up with such pride and determination. As his unit came directly parallel to Emma's position, James found his eyes drawn to her face. She was looking directly at him with an expression of pure admiration and gratitude. Her small hands held the sign steady despite its size, and her grandmother stood behind her with obvious pride and love. For a moment that lasted only seconds, but felt much longer. James made direct eye contact with Emma. In that instant, something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a connection that transcended the formal barriers of military protocol. Emma's eyes widened as she realized one of the guards was actually looking at her, really seeing her and her message. The crowd around Emma seemed to fade away as she focused entirely on this moment. She had hoped that maybe one of the guards might notice her sign, but she never expected this. Actual eye contact, a sense that her gratitude was being received and understood. James felt his professional composure being tested in a way it never had been before. Every instinct told him to maintain his forward gaze and continue marching. But something about this little girl's genuine appreciation touched him deeply. Her sign wasn't asking for anything, wasn't seeking attention for attention's sake. It was pure gratitude, offered freely from a child who understood that these soldiers did important work protecting her country and her queen. The impact of Emma's gesture hit James more powerfully than he could have anticipated. Here was a child who had traveled far from home, who had carefully made a sign to express her thanks, who stood in the crowd not for entertainment, but out of genuine respect and appreciation. In a world where military service was sometimes taken for granted or overlooked, her simple "thank you" represented everything he had hoped to achieve in his career. As these thoughts raced through James's mind, still marching in perfect formation, he realized that this moment was testing more than just his military discipline. It was challenging him to decide what kind of person he wanted to be: someone who followed orders without exception, or someone who recognized when human connection transcended protocol. The weight of the moment pressed down on James as Emma continued to hold up her sign, her young face glowing with pride and hope. He could see her grandmother behind her, equally moved by the significance of the occasion. 3 generations were represented in this scene: Emma with her innocent gratitude, her grandmother with her memories of military service, and James himself, representing the current generation of those who served. Behind Emma, Margaret watched her granddaughter's reaction and felt her own emotions stirring. She remembered her late husband's stories about moments like these, when the formal ceremonies became personal, when the connection between those who served and those they protected became real and tangible. The crowd around them continued cheering and waving, unaware that something profound was happening just a few feet away. Emma never broke her gaze from James, holding her sign steady and high, her message clear and unwavering. In her mind, she was doing exactly what her grandmother had taught her, showing respect and gratitude to those who dedicated their lives to protecting others. James felt time slow as he approached the moment of decision. In a few more steps, he would be past Emma's position, and the moment would be gone forever. He could continue marching, maintaining the perfect discipline expected of the Queen's Guard, or he could acknowledge this genuine gesture of appreciation in a way that honored both his duty and his humanity. The morning sun continued to shine down on the parade route, illuminating the faces of thousands of spectators, but for James, only one face mattered now, that of a 7-year-old girl who had reminded him why his service truly mattered. The decisive moment arrived as James found himself directly in front of Emma's position. Time seemed suspended as he processed the enormity of what was happening inside him. Every fiber of his military training screamed at him to maintain formation, to keep his eyes forward, to uphold the rigid discipline that defined the Queen's Guard. Yet something deeper, something fundamentally human, was calling him to respond to this child's heartfelt gesture. Emma continued to hold her sign with unwavering determination, her small arms beginning to ache from keeping it raised, but she didn't lower it even an inch. Her dark eyes remained fixed on James, filled with such genuine admiration and gratitude that it took his breath away. She wasn't seeking attention or hoping to be noticed by cameras. Her appreciation was pure and unconditional. In that crystalline moment, James made a decision that would change both their lives forever. With movements so subtle that most of the crowd didn't initially notice, James began to slow his pace. It started as barely perceptible, a slight adjustment in his step that caused a small gap to form between him and the guardsman marching directly in front of him. Then, in a moment that would be talked about for years to come, Staff Sergeant James Wellington came to a complete stop. The effect was immediate and rippling. The guardsman behind James had to adjust his step to avoid collision, which caused the one behind him to do the same. Like dominoes, the entire formation began to compress and then halt as the reality of what was happening became clear. James stood at rigid attention directly in front of Emma, his eyes now openly fixed on her and her handmade sign. Emma's gasp was audible even over the crowd noise. Her grandmother's hand flew to her chest as she realized what was happening. Around them, the cheering began to fade as people noticed that something extraordinary was occurring right in their midst. Phones that had been recording the standard parade procession quickly swiveled to focus on the unexpected drama unfolding at the barrier. For several heartbeats, the only sound was the distant music from other sections of the parade that had continued moving. James stood perfectly still, but his attention was completely focused on Emma. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to his bearskin hat and executed a precise military salute directed specifically at the little girl. Emma's eyes widened to their fullest extent as she realized that this incredible soldier was saluting her. Her mouth formed a perfect circle of surprise and joy. Without conscious thought, she lowered her sign and attempted her own salute in return. Her small hand positioned approximately where she thought it should go, her face serious with the weight of the moment. The crowd around them erupted. The silence had lasted only seconds, but when people realized what they were witnessing, the cheering became deafening. Parents lifted their children higher to see better. Phones and cameras captured every second of the exchange. But for James and Emma, the chaos around them seemed distant and unimportant. James held his salute for a full 10 seconds, honoring not just Emma but everything she represented. The appreciation of those he served, the innocence of childhood gratitude, the connection between protector and protected that made his service meaningful. When he finally lowered his hand, he offered Emma something even more remarkable, a genuine smile that transformed his usually stoic face into something warm and approachable. Emma beamed back at him with such radiant joy that tears began to flow down her cheeks. These weren't tears of sadness, but of overwhelming happiness at having her appreciation acknowledged so beautifully. Her grandmother, Margaret, found herself crying as well, remembering her husband and knowing how proud he would have been to witness this moment. But James wasn't finished. In another breach of protocol that would have shocked his commanding officers had they been present, he took 3 steps toward the barrier that separated him from Emma. The crowd pressed back slightly, creating a small pocket of space around the little girl and her grandmother. James came to attention again, but this time he was close enough for Emma to see the details of his uniform, the individual buttons and decorations that marked his service. "Thank you for your sign, miss," James said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the relative quiet that had settled over their immediate area. "It means more to me and my fellow soldiers than you could possibly know." Emma tried to speak but found herself too overcome with emotion to form words. Instead, she held up her sign again, this time adding to her message by pointing to each element. The word thank, then you, then the hearts she had drawn around the border. She wanted him to understand that every part of it was meant for him and soldiers like him. Margaret stepped forward slightly, placing her hand on Emma's shoulder. "My granddaughter worked on that sign for hours," she told James, her voice thick with emotion. "Her grandfather served in the household division many years ago. She wanted to make sure you all knew how grateful we are." James felt another wave of emotion at this revelation. The connection was even deeper than he had realized. This wasn't just random appreciation, but a family tradition of honoring service members. He could see in Margaret's eyes the pride and memory of her own connection to military service. "What was your grandfather's name?" James asked Emma gently. Emma found her voice at last. "Sergeant Thomas Mitchell." She said proudly, her words clear despite her tears. "Nan says he was brave like you." The name wasn't familiar to James, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the legacy of service that connected them across generations. "I'm sure he was very brave," James replied. "And I'm sure he would be very proud of you today." Behind them, the rest of James's unit had maintained their formation as best they could, though several of his fellow guardsmen were struggling to maintain their own composure as they witnessed this extraordinary scene. The parade officials, initially alarmed by the break in protocol, found themselves reluctant to intervene in what was clearly a profound moment of human connection. The crowd had now completely stopped their general cheering and was focused entirely on the interaction between James and Emma. Many people were openly crying as they watched this simple exchange of gratitude and acknowledgement. Parents pulled their own children closer, using the moment to explain the importance of appreciating those who serve. Emma's sign had become a symbol of something larger than either she or James had intended. In a world often divided by politics and differences of opinion, here was pure, uncomplicated gratitude, meeting genuine dedication to service. The moment transcended the ceremony itself and became about the fundamental bonds that hold a society together. James reached into his tunic and withdrew something that made Emma gasp again. It was a small pin bearing the insignia of the household division, the same unit her grandfather had served in decades earlier. These pins were precious to the guardsmen, symbols of their elite status and dedication. "I want you to have this," James said, carefully placing the pin in Emma's small palm. "When you look at it, remember that people like your grandfather and me, we serve because of people like you and your grandmother. You make everything we do worthwhile." Emma looked down at the pin in her hand, its metal surface catching the sunlight. She understood instinctively that she was being given something important, something that represented not just this moment but a connection to her grandfather's legacy and to all the brave men and women who chose to serve. "I'll keep it forever," Emma whispered, closing her fingers carefully around the pin. "And I'll never forget this day." Margaret wiped her eyes with a handkerchief, overwhelmed by the generosity of this soldier, who had risked his career to acknowledge her granddaughter's gesture. "Thank you," she managed to say. "You've given her something she'll treasure for the rest of her life." James stepped back and came to attention one final time, offering both Emma and Margaret a formal bow of respect. The crowd began to applaud, but this time the sound was different. Not the casual cheering of a ceremonial event, but the deeper, more meaningful appreciation of people who had witnessed something genuinely moving. As James began to turn back toward his formation, Emma called out, "One last thing. Will you tell the other soldiers that I'm grateful for them too?" James stopped and looked back at her. "I will," he promised. "I'll tell them about the little girl who reminded us all why we're proud to serve." The ripple effects of this extraordinary moment were just beginning to be felt throughout the crowd and beyond, as phones captured the scene and social media began to spread the story of the Royal Guard who stopped a parade to honor a child's gratitude. As James returned to his formation and the parade slowly resumed its forward motion, the true magnitude of what had just occurred began to reverberate through the crowd and far beyond.
The brief stoppage had lasted less than 5 minutes, but those minutes had created a moment that would be remembered and retold for generations.
Within hours, videos of the exchange between James and Emma had spread across social media platforms worldwide. The hashtag #ThankYouSign began trending globally as millions of people shared and commented on the footage. News organizations picked up the story, and by evening, it had become the lead story on networks around the world. But the immediate impact was felt most powerfully by those who had witnessed it firsthand. As Emma and Margaret made their way home to Yorkshire that evening, Emma clutched the household division pin in her small fist, unwilling to let it out of her sight even for a moment. She had pinned her "thank you" sign to her bedroom wall, and it would remain there for years to come, a tangible reminder of the day her simple gesture had stopped a royal parade. "Nan," Emma said as their train pulled away from London. "Why did he do that? Why did he stop when he wasn't supposed to?" Margaret considered the question carefully before answering. "Sometimes, my dear, the most important rules are the ones written in our hearts, not in military manuals. That soldier saw something in you that reminded him why he became a guardsman in the first place. Your appreciation meant so much to him that he was willing to break protocol to acknowledge it." Emma nodded thoughtfully, beginning to understand that she had been part of something much larger than a simple thank you. Do you think Grandpa would have liked what happened today? Margaret's eyes filled with tears again as she thought of her late husband. Oh, my darling, he would have been so proud of you. And I think he would have understood exactly why that young man did what he did. Meanwhile, back at the barracks, James was facing the consequences of his decision. He had been immediately summoned to meet with his commanding officer following the conclusion of the parade. Major Harrison was a stern man with 30 years of military experience, and James expected to face severe disciplinary action for his breach of protocol. Sergeant Wellington, Major Harrison began, his expression unreadable, in all my years of service, I have never witnessed such a blatant violation of ceremonial protocol during a royal parade. James stood at rigid attention, prepared to accept whatever punishment was deemed appropriate. Yes, sir. I take full responsibility for my actions, sir. Major Harrison studied James for several long moments before continuing. What you did today was completely against regulations. The Queen's Guard does not interact with the crowd. We do not stop formations. We do not break protocol for any reason. Understood, sir. However, the Major continued, his stern expression beginning to soften slightly, I have been receiving phone calls for the past 3 hours. From the palace, from the Ministry of Defense, from news organizations around the world. Do you know what they're all saying, Sergeant? James remained silent, unsure how to respond. They're saying that your actions today represent everything that is finest about British military service. That you demonstrated not just discipline and training, but heart and humanity. The palace has specifically requested that no disciplinary action be taken against you. James felt a wave of relief wash over him, but the Major wasn't finished. More importantly, Sergeant, I've been watching the footage of what happened. That little girl's sign, her genuine appreciation, your response, it reminded me why we do what we do. Sometimes the most important military action is knowing when to be human first and a soldier second. The conversation that followed was unlike any James had ever had with a superior officer. Major Harrison shared his own experiences of moments when protocol had to give way to humanity, and spoke about the balance between military discipline and human connection that defined the finest soldiers. Over the following days, James found himself overwhelmed by the response to his actions. Letters poured in from around the world, from military families, from children who had seen the videos, from veterans who understood the significance of what had happened. Each letter reinforced his belief that he had made the right choice. One letter in particular moved him deeply. It came from a military family in Australia whose son was serving overseas. The mother wrote about how she had shown the video to her other children, explaining that their brother's service was appreciated by people like Emma, and that good soldiers like James understood the importance of that connection. Emma's impact extended far beyond that single day as well. Inspired by her example, schools across the country began organising appreciation events for local service members. Children made their own thank you signs and visited military bases, police stations, and fire departments. Emma's simple gesture had sparked a movement of gratitude that touched thousands of lives. 6 months later, Emma received an unexpected invitation to visit the Household Division barracks for a special ceremony. When she and her grandmother arrived, they were greeted by Major Harrison and a full honour guard, including James, who had been promoted to Colour Sergeant in recognition of his exemplary service. Miss Mitchell, Major Harrison announced formally, by order of Her Majesty the Queen, you are hereby appointed as an honorary friend of the Household Division in recognition of your demonstration of appreciation and respect for military service.
Emma was presented with a certificate signed by the Queen herself, along with a miniature ceremonial sword that had been crafted specially for her.
The citation read, "To Emma Mitchell, whose simple gesture of gratitude reminded us all of the true meaning of service and the importance of the bond between those who serve and those they protect." As the ceremony concluded, James approached Emma and her grandmother. In the months since their first meeting, he had thought often about that moment when a child's appreciation had touched his heart so deeply. "How does it feel to be an honorary friend of the Household Division?" he asked Emma with a smile. Emma, now 8 years old and still treasuring the pin he had given her, looked up at him seriously. "It feels like a big responsibility," she said. "I want to make sure other children know they should appreciate soldiers like you." Margaret beamed with pride as she watched her granddaughter speak with such maturity and purpose. The shy little girl who had made a simple sign had grown into a confident young advocate for military appreciation.
You know, James said, kneeling down to Emma's level, that sign you made taught me something important.
"It taught me that the best way to honor our duty is to remember that we serve real people with real gratitude. You reminded me of the human side of military service." Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out the pin he had given her all those months ago. She had worn it to every special occasion since that day, keeping it polished and treating it as her most precious possession. "I brought this today because I wanted to thank you again," she said. "Not just for giving it to me, but for teaching me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show your heart." The wisdom in her young words struck James profoundly. She was right. It had taken courage to stop that day, not physical courage, but emotional courage. The willingness to risk professional consequences in order to honor a genuine human moment had indeed been one of the bravest things he had ever done. As the years passed, the story of Emma and James became legend within the household division. New recruits learned about the day when a guardsman stopped a royal parade to acknowledge a child's gratitude, and how that moment exemplified the best of military service. The story was told not as a cautionary tale about breaking protocol, but as an example of how the finest soldiers know when duty requires them to be human first. Emma grew up with an unwavering respect for military service, eventually pursuing a career in veterans affairs, dedicating her life to ensuring that service members received the appreciation and support they deserved. She never forgot the lesson James had taught her that day, that genuine gratitude has the power to transform lives, and that the simple act of saying thank you can create ripples that extend far beyond our imagination. James continued his military career with renewed purpose, eventually becoming a senior instructor at the Royal Military Academy, where he taught young officers about the importance of remembering the human element of their service. He kept Emma's original sign framed in his office and told her story to every new class of cadets. The moment when a royal guard stopped a parade for a little girl's secret gesture became more than just a heartwarming story. It became a reminder that in our increasingly complex world, sometimes the most profound truths are found in the simplest exchanges. That gratitude freely given and gracefully received can bridge any gap. That protocol matters, but humanity matters more. And that a 7-year-old girl with a homemade sign can teach even the most disciplined soldier what it truly means to serve with honor. Their story continued to inspire people around the world, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the greatest impact, and that the measure of our character is often found in how we respond when genuine appreciation meets dedicated service. In that perfect moment on a London street, Emma and James had created something beautiful together, a memory that would last lifetimes, and a lesson that would echo through generations.